The Shunned House by Abdullah. Table of contents. We have an introduction to the novel slash author. We have some gothic elements, some horror elements, and finally the conclusion. Introduction. The Shunned House is a gothic horror novel composed by H.P. Lovecraft, or Howard Phillips Lovecraft. It was published in 1924 and is centered or focused around a monster feeding on the living, and this monster is inhabiting the Shunned House or the haunted house. The first gothic element is the actual Shunned House, which is a haunted house, and the dark and haunted house is mentioned in the first chapter. In my childhood, the Shunned House was vacant with barren, gnarled, and terrible old trees, long, queerly pale grass, and nightmarishly misshapen weed in the high-terraced yards where birds never lingered. That's halfway through the first chapter. The haunted house is described as a dark and bizarre sensation, which we normally only talk about in movies or films. It's like a fiction thing. The second gothic element is the monster who inhabits this so-called house, while feeding on the living, of course. This so-called monster is a gothic element mentioned in the third chapter, alleging that there must lie buried beneath the house one of those vampires. Vampire is classified as monsters, so yeah, we hear some monsters. There are mentioned some monsters in the novel, so that's a gothic element. A third gothic element is the actual atmosphere of mystery and suspense. The sense of bloodthirsty monster living in the house is already some suspense on its own, but what makes this novel so special is this so-called monster is in a way only in the imagination of the protagonist and the people around him. Many people have indeed died in this house, but it couldn't have been the monster, because we know that we are informed that the monster was actually just an elbow. It says that in the last part of the fifth chapter. Still more I scraped, and then abruptly I leaped out of the hole and away from the filthy thing, frantically unstopping and tilting the heavy carboys and precipitating their corrosive contents one after another down that charnel gulf and upon the unthinkable abnormality whose titan elbow I had seen. So yeah, we informed that the monster was just a titan elbow in the ending, and an elbow can't kill people, like my elbow can't kill someone, or I think not. Even though it was just an elbow, the novel still felt like a gothic horror novel. The power of suspense and mystery still gave it the feeling, the scary, spooky feeling in your stomach. Horror elements. Some would say that suspense and mystery is already a horror element, but we've already mentioned that. So we're gonna talk about the element of surprise, which is also another horror element that is mentioned or talked about. As previously I mentioned a quote about the protagonist finding out the monster was an elbow, or should I say titan elbow. This is a surprise. We were surprised. We didn't know that the monster was just an ordinary elbow. Or not ordinary, it was a giant elbow, but it was just an elbow. So this is the surprise, the tingling feeling, the adrenaline rush on what happens next. The difference between the suspense and mystery and the element of surprise is the build-up. In the suspense and mystery, we want a build-up. We want to get consumed by the text or the movie, the scene, whatever. We want, the consumption of, what might happen next. But in the element of surprise, we're supposed to be surprised. We're not supposed to know what happens. It's like a jump scare sort of thing. We don't want to know what happens next. Or we don't want, to know beforehand what happens next. Another example of a horror element is a clear and lengthy description of everything, no matter how small it is. That is shown at the start of the novel. The small painted windows were largely broken, and a nameless air of desolation hung around the precarious paneling, shaking interior shutters, peeling wallpaper, falling plaster, rickety staircases, and such fragments of battered furniture as still remained. The narrator describes the interior of the Shunned House as very pictorial and expressive, with many describing verbs. We know exactly what's at the scene, which is another important horror element, because we want to get consumed. We want to put ourselves in the position of the protagonist. Conclusion. I would say technically the Shunned House is more of a horror novel than a gothic novel, because yeah, the gothic novel it has those criteria. The monster, the haunted house, but in a way it didn't fulfill that because there wasn't actually a monster, and if there wasn't a monster, then the haunted house was just an ordinary house. It wasn't anything special, just a bunch of coincidences. So therefore, I would more put it as a horror than gothic novel. That's it.